There would have been a tower at the end of the wall known as a postern. It was demolished in 1829 to make way for traffic. As we turn onto Peasholm Green, on our right is St Cuthbert's Church. The church is mentioned in the Domesday Book of 1086, the book in which William the Conqueror listed all of the property and land he took over when he invaded, so he could tax the locals. Notice the church has two doors, a large door with a porch to the left-hand end and a smaller door to the right-hand end. The small door is known as the Devil's Door, and legend has it that the door should be left open during baptisms to allow the devil to escape from the child and the church. The actual age of the church is a bit hazy, but it probably dates back to Saxon times. If you look to the left, there is a 15th century timber-framed house, now the Black Swan pub. The Black Swan claims to be one of the most haunted pubs in York, but to be fair, most pubs in York claim to be either the most haunted or the oldest. It does have some rather intriguing. It has a grumpy old man who sits at the bar, but nobody ever buys him a drink. A young lady sits looking into the fire, but nobody has ever seen her face. And a pair of legs which run around, bringing a whole new meaning to the phrase, getting legless in a pub. Stonebow. This is our nearest stop for York's most famous street, the Shambles, the medieval cobbled street of the butchers, the market, the city centre shops, and the Merchant Adventurers Hall. Please alight here for any of these places. We think it gets its name from a corruption of an old Saxon saying, "Witna whatna," meaning it's neither one thing nor the other. The street only has 3 properties, numbers 1, 1A, and 1.5. It never gets to 2. From an old Danish word, Fleshermels, which means the street of the butchers. Look to the right, and you may get a brief view along the Shambles. At the far end, you can see how the houses nearly touch at the top. It is said that 2 men can lean out of the windows and shake hands across the street. If you heard the shout, "Gardez-lou," you would very quickly get under the overhang of the buildings, as Gardez-lou means watch out for the water, and meant that the contents of somebody's chamber pot was about to be deposited on your head. We move into Coppergate. It doesn't get its name from the metal copper as you might think, but from cupra, the Norse word for cup maker. It was when the new Coppergate shopping precinct was being built in the late 1970s and early 1980s that over 40,000 finds from a Viking settlement were unearthed, beautifully preserved by the silt and mud around here. What was found here was so important that it even changed the way we teach about Vikings in the national school curriculum. Today you can see what was found in the Jorvik Viking Centre, where you can travel back in time over 1,000 years in York's history to experience the sights, the sounds and even the smells of Viking York. You can visit the Viking Centre from our next stop, but please remain seated until we arrive at the Clifford's Tower stop. We are now moving into Tower Street and the site of the castle. This is your stop for the Castle Museum, Clifford's Tower, York Boat River Cruises, the Jorvik Viking Centre, York Dungeon, Fairfax House, and St George's Field Coach and Car Park. To restore the Catholic faith in England after Henry VIII split from Rome with the dissolution of the monasteries. Side of the tower, and his body was left for a year as a warning to other would-be traitors. Those on trial here are still held in the same cells the offenders were held in over 200 years ago. This is due to the building being a Grade 1 listed property, so it cannot be altered inside or out. On the left you can see the last remaining section of the castle wall. Look left as we pass the circular drum tower, and you can see where the drawbridge would have been at the base of the wall. Ahead we can can see a square tower marking the end of this section of the city wall. This is Fishergate Postern Tower, which stands where the wall met the River Foss, which would have been much wider than it is today. There were 6 postern towers on the walls of York. Postern means rear entrance, and this is the only such tower still remaining. As we turn into Lead Mills Lane, look to the right. On the wall of the tower, just above head height, is a stone projection sticking out. This projection is the King's Fish Pool down below. Over the hedge to our left is the graveyard of St. George's Church, which has just one upstanding headstone in it. Those on the bottom deck may see this headstone through the gates on the left as we turn. This is the grave of Dick Turpin, the notorious Georgian highwayman who robbed stagecoaches in the 18th century. On the left is St. George's Roman Catholic Church, which was built in 1850 for the Irish settlers who arrived in this area during the Irish potato famine. The church replaced an earlier one and was temporarily the Catholic Cathedral of York. It was designed by the architect Joseph Hansom, who also designed the Hansom Cab, a horse-drawn vehicle which was very popular in Victorian times. An example of a Hansom Cab can be seen in the Castle Museum. We move into Walmgate. This street was originally called Walbergate, possibly named after a female Viking warrior named Walber. It is one of York's oldest streets, following the line of the ancient Roman road to the east. Looking to the right, you will see a lovely timber frame building. This is called Bowes-Morrell House and dates back to about 1400. In the 1800s, it was known as Kilmartin's, a lodging house for the poor. It is said that if you couldn't get a bed for the night, they would stretch a length of rope out from one end of the room to the other, and you would sleep hanging over the rope. This was known as a penny on a clothesline. Straight ahead of us is Walmgate Bar, the most complete gateway on a city wall, not only here in York, but also in the United Kingdom. This is because it still retains its barbican, which is the tunnel-like structure on the outside of the gateway. We will see the barbican when we turn right. You will not see another original barbican attached to a city wall unless you go to Krakow in Poland. All the others have now gone. Elizabethan gatekeeper's house, which stands on 2 stone pillars, one either side of the central archway. We don't know where the pillars are from, but we do know they are of Roman origin. The gateway would have had only one central arch. The others on the left and right are modern. The gate still has its original 15th century oak doors. The barbican is an extra defensive screen the inner oak doors and the outer doors, which were made of iron. The defending soldiers on the walls above could then attack those trapped below, firing arrows, throwing down rocks and boiling liquids. As we turn right, look to the right, and you will have a brief view inside the barbican. Imagine being trapped in there, with the soldiers throwing all kinds of nasty things down from above. Tees cattle market was relocated to this area. Cattle and sheep were brought here from all over the country to be traded. The flat grassed areas at the foot of the walls were where livestock were kept in pens awaiting their sale. Outside of York, and was renamed the York Livestock Centre. On our left is the Barbican Leisure Centre, which which is named after the Barbican at nearby Warmgate Bar. This is where the UK Snooker Championship has been held many times, and it is also a music and entertainment venue. On our right is Fishergate Bar. This is the smallest of the 5 medieval gateways, first recorded in 1315. The red painted stone above the archway reveals the date of the current bar, which is 1487. 2 years after that date, the gateway was attacked and damaged in the Yorkshire Peasants' Revolt against Henry VII. The rebels burned the gates of the bar after murdering the Earl of Northumberland. The gateway was bricked up soon after and wasn't reopened. Fishergate is the road to Fulford, a village just south of York. This was the site of the Battle of Fulford on the 20th of September 1066, where the Vikings beat the Saxons. The Saxon army then returned the favour at the Battle of Stamford Bridge, just 5 days later. Just 3 weeks later, however, there was a third, more famous battle, the Battle of Hastings, where the Saxons, led by Harold Godwinson, were defeated by the Normans, led by William the Conqueror. Ahead we can see the Travel Lodge, which is a modern building, but you can see how the architect has tried to get the building to fit in with old York. He's put a turret shape on it and covered the walls in magnesium limestone, the same stone the minster and the city walls are made of. The idea is that eventually it will blend in with its older surroundings. Look to the left, and you can see in the distance a glass structure above the River Foss. This is York's flood barrier. A barrier is lowered from this structure to stop the River Ouse backing up the River Foss, and this stops the eastern side of the city from flooding, unless it fails, as it did in such spectacular fashion on Boxing Day 2015. Move on to Skeldergate Bridge and cross the River Ouse, York's main river. Look to your right to see Ouse Bridge, the oldest of the bridges built in 1821, replacing various older bridges dating back to Viking times. Look to your right, and you will see the city walls at Bale Hill, the grass mound with trees growing on it. Bale Hill was the site of William the Conqueror's second castle, dating to around 1068. Nothing remains of it, however, because it was only ever made of wood, and nobody wanted to pay for its upkeep. Eventually, it was found to be in such a sad state of repair, it was pulled down. On our left is an area known as Clementthorpe, named after the Norman church and nunnery of St Clement. Bishopthorpe Road ahead will take you to the village of Bishopthorpe, which is where you'll find Bishopthorpe Palace, home to the Archbishop of York. Also along Bishopthorpe Road, before the village of Bishopthorpe, you will find access to York Racecourse, on the area known as the Knavesmire. Bishopthorpe Road has been named in the Times as one of the top 30 of the coolest places to live in the country. In 2014, the Tour de France passed through this area on its way into York. A great street party was held here, and some of the local pubs even changed their names. The Slip Inn became La Slip, and the Swan became La Swan. Notice the buildings around become much more modern outside the walls, but don't be fooled. There used to be older buildings outside the city walls, but in 1644, York was under siege for 3 months during the Civil War. Around 30,000 parliamentarian troops surrounded the city. However, it is said it was the royalists defending the city who pulled down the buildings outside the walls to get a better view of those attacking them. We are now in a area of Victorian and Edwardian York. With the arrival of the railways to York in the 1800s, the city grew rapidly. More houses were needed to accommodate the growing population, which had shot up from 17,000 in 1801 to a staggering 77,000 by 1881. These new suburbs were built outside the city walls, with back-to-back terraces to house the people who had come to York to work on the railways and in the chocolate factories. Once the railways had arrived, York became much easier to get to and quickly became quite a tourist destination for the middle classes. No longer did you have to make the long and dangerous journey down south for entertainment by horse-drawn carriage, and so York soon became the leisure and pleasure capital of the north. Chocolate making took off in York mainly with the coming of the railways, although chocolate has been made in York since 1700. The two main chocolate makers in York were Terry's, who started making chocolate in 1767, and later Rowntree's, who had opened a grocer's shop in the centre of York in 1822. Road, we pass a modern housing estate known as the Chocolate Works, which gives a clue to what was in this area. Behind the buildings on the left, we can see a brief sight of what remains of the Terry's chocolate factory. Sadly, Terry's no longer makes chocolate here in York. The factory was closed down in 2005 and production was moved elsewhere. Its most famous product, the chocolate orange, is now made in Europe. Is York Racecourse, the home of horse racing here in York. There has been horse racing in York since Roman times, and racing has taken place on this area of land, known as the Knavesmire, since 1730. The Knavesmire may get its name from a knave, a common servant allowed to use this area for leisure and for grazing animals, and mire, a boggy area of land, which it still is to this day. The Knavesmire wasn't just used for horse racing, but other entertainments also took place here. It was common to see bare-knuckle boxing, bear baiting, and cockfights here. The most popular spectator sport, however, were the hangings, which took place here from 1379 right up until 1801. People would come from far and wide to see villains hang at the Tyburn. The most notorious person to be hanged at the Tyburn was none other than Dick Turpin, a highway robber who was executed here 15 days of horse racing a year, the highlight of which is the Ebor Festival that takes place in August. York Racecourse also had the honour of hosting Royal Ascot in 2005, whilst the Ascot course was being renovated. When the late Pope John Paul II visited the United Kingdom, it was the first time a reigning pope had visited this country. He came to the racecourse here in York and 100,000 people. The Knavesmire is also used for music concerts, circuses, fairs. On the right, in the middle of the road, is the herdsman's cottage, which looks like something out of the Hansel and Gretel fairy tale. The cottage is where the man who looked after the animals on the Knavesmire would have lived from 1840. Traditionally, if you own the property, you are given the title Keeper of the Stray, although there are no herds of animals grazing on the Knavesmire anymore. Area of York, known as the Mount, possibly due to it being the highest land in the city. The Mount was always one of the more favoured areas to live, even in Roman times. The large buildings around this area date mainly from the Georgian and Victorian periods, and these were once private residences containing many servants. Today, most of the buildings have become hotels, guest houses, and apartments. The Elm Bank Hotel on the left was built in 1870. Behind it, but out of our view, are the buildings of the Mount, a private all-girl boarding school. It has had some well-known pupils, with the most famous being the actor Dame Judi Dench, who played M in some of the James Bond movies. Dame Judy is actually a local York girl and is a popular and well-loved figure in the city. The Mount follows the line of the old Roman road into the city from the south, which lies to the left of the modern road, just a few feet underground. Romans used to bury their dead alongside main roads, outside their settlements, possibly because they thought the dead would like to hear the sounds of the living going on with their daily lives. There are hundreds of such burials in this area. In 2004, the remains of around 80 people were discovered during building professional fighters who fought and died for the entertainment of the ruling Romans. Almost all the corpses are of robust young males, many of whom met their death by decapitation between the late 1st and 4th centuries AD. Archaeologists at the York Archaeological Trust, who were leading the investigation, announced tantalizing evidence that the men were possibly gladiators brought to Britain from across the Mediterranean. They would have fought in an amphitheatre, which is yet to be found. Looking ahead, you will see Micklegate Bar. This is one of the 4 main gateways into the city of York. Micklegate's name comes from Mickleffe, meaning Great Street, and it is said to be the front door to York. It is also known as the Royal Entrance, as it is the custom for every monarch who visits York to ask permission of the Lord Mayor to be allowed into the city through this gateway. Every monarch has done this, except for 2. Henry VIII, who on his second visit didn't go through the ceremony allowing him into the city, and Queen Victoria. We are now moving into Queen Street. Ahead of us is York's modern railway station, opened in 1877, when it claimed to be the largest railway station in the world. It is no longer the largest, but is still an amazing piece of architecture, having been built on a long curve. The first permanent station was built down to our right inside the walls. The large arches were knocked through the walls to allow the trains into the station in 1841. The trains would go through the arches and then have to sweep left to the old station inside the walls. It wasn't very practical, as once you got the train in there, it then had to be turned around to get back out, and this proved to be problematic. It would have been fine if it was only 1 or 2 trains a day, but York was becoming a very busy station, which soon saw over 300 trains a day coming to York. The new station was built to alleviate this problem in 1877. This stop is for the railway station and the former Royal York Hotel. From here you can also catch the Yorkshire Coastliner buses to the east coast. On the opposite side of the road, you can board the Coastliner buses back as far as the Holiday Inn on Tadcaster Road using your tour bus ticket. If you fancy a day out in Leeds, you can purchase tickets on the Yorkshire Coastliner buses buried in the mass grave outside the walls, and very few headstones still remain, although only people with money would have had the dignity of a headstone. And in place for a nasty disease. The church cemeteries were filling up quickly, and the churches didn't really want the bodies in their graveyards for fear of the disease spreading, so a new pit was dug outside the city walls. Unfortunately, they didn't understand cholera in 1832 and put it in, as cholera is not an airborne disease, but is spread by sewage and dirty water. A good example of how a tale or myth starts can be shown by this cholera graveyard on our right. Local children would always be told by their parents not to stand on that piece of land as you would catch cholera. Of course it's not true, but you will still hear parents telling children that around York today. To our left are the Memorial Gardens. These are gardens dedicated to those who lost their lives in the First and Second World Wars. This is our nearest stop for the National Railway Museum. take a trip around the National Railway Museum, you will find something in there for everyone, not just the rail enthusiast. Do allow plenty of time for your visit there, as the museum is huge. It is also every Yorkshireman's favourite price to enter. Looking through the trees ahead, we can see the true scale and stature of the former Royal York Hotel. As we said, it used to be called the Royal York, but shouldn't have been, as none of the royal family have ever stayed in it. Looking ahead, you will see the city walls. If you look through the arch, you will see a cream-coloured building. This is the original station hotel. This is where, on one visit, Queen Victoria stopped off when travelling to Balmoral by train in 1854. She was with Prince Albert and her children, and they took lunch in the station hotel. There is a tale that when Victoria was given the bill for lunch, she was so incensed that she vowed never to come to York again. I'm not sure what was said, but I'm guessing one was not amused. We passed through a modern arch put in the city walls to allow for easier traffic flow in 1876 and move onto Lendal Bridge, which was opened in 1861, but it collapsed and wasn't reopened until 1863. It crosses the River Ouse, York's main river, which takes its name from the Celtic or pre-Celtic Oudsos, and probably means simply water or slow-flowing river. On the left is a tower with a conical-shaped roof. This is Barker Tower. It used to be the ferryman's cottage and was part of the city's defences when a chain would have been stretched across the river to the tower on the far bank to stop ships from attacking the city and to stop ships from leaving without paying their taxes. On the right, facing onto the river, is the Guild Hall. Originally, it was built in 1445 for the Guild of St Christopher and St George and the Corporation, but the structure you see today is mainly a modern reconstruction after the building was badly damaged during the Baedeker air raids in the Second World War. On the left is Lendal Tower. It dates back to the reign of Richard I and has stood next to the River Ouse since 1299. It was part of the city's defences. In 1677, the tower was leased to the York Waterworks Company for the princely sum of 1 peppercorn per year for 500 years. In 2010, the tower was sold and is now a private home. In the gardens to our left, you will find the ruins of St Mary's Abbey, once the largest and richest Benedictine abbey in the north of England. It was pulled down by Henry VIII's men in the dissolution of the monasteries in the 1500s. Also, you will see some of the Roman fortress wall and the multangular tower, as well as the remains of St Leonard's Hospital, which was closed in 1539. The hospital's main function was to care for the sick, the poor, the old and the infirm. The garden also houses the Yorkshire Museum. On the right, the street of Lendal, opposite the museum garden's entrance, will take you down to the city centre shops, the Mansion House, which is the residence of the Lord Mayor of York, and Betty's Tea Rooms, which is the most famous tea rooms in the north. Be aware, Betty's is quite pricey, but it is well worth visiting for a treat, once you get past the queue. Ahead of us is York Minster, the jewel in York's crown and the largest Gothic cathedral in Northern Europe. This present building took 252 years to complete. It was started in 1220 and not finished off until 1472. We say it's complete, but in actual fact the central tower should have a spire, about another 32 metres or 100 feet in height on the top, but the weight of the spire would have collapsed the central tower, so it was never built. The Minster has 128 stained glass windows containing over 3 million pieces of glass. brings us into Exhibition Square. This is the nearest stop for York Minster, the Art Gallery, King's Manor, Bootham Bar, and the nicest section. It was called Eboracum, which possibly means place of yew trees. The Romans were very advanced. At this time, the city had paved streets, a water supply, proper sewers. As we move across the junction into Gilly Gate, originally called St Giles Gate, on the right-hand side of the bus, just above the shop windows, you will see a black lamp on the wall. Look behind the lamp and you can see a small white cat. You'll see lots of these cats all over the city's buildings. Originally put there as good luck charms in Victorian times, later they became a trademark of a local architect called Tom Adams. These cats have become a feature all over the city. On the right, you can see some of the buildings have bricked-up windows on the first floor. This comes from the Georgian window tax. In 1696, a law was passed on which owners were taxed on the amount of windows their property had. To avoid paying this tax, windows were bricked up. These days, when something is expensive, you'll hear people say, "That's daylight robbery." It is possible this saying comes from the old tax. You either paid up or lost your daylight, hence daylight robbery. Looking ahead on the corner, you can see the award-winning modern extension to the York St John University, formerly a Victorian Anglican teacher training college. It became the College of Ripon York St John before being granted university status in 2006, and it has around 6,000 students. It is one of two universities, the other being York University. This is situated on the eastern outskirts of the city and opened in 1963. It boasts over 15,000 students and is regularly voted into the top 15 universities in the country. In Lord Mayor's Walk, look to the right and we will get a nice view along the city walls. You can still see the defensive moat at the foot of the walls. This once would have been full of filthy water and rotting waste. Behind the wall, to the right, you can see York Minster, or to give it its proper title, the Cathedral and Metropolitical Church of St Peter in York. It is both a minster and cathedral. The name Minster derives from the Latin monasterium. From here, the local monks would go out to teach or minister. It is also a cathedral because it contains the throne of a bishop. This is taken from the Latin cathedra and means seat. In York's case, the seat of an archbishop. Keep looking on your right, and as we turn, you will see Monk Bar, which is the tallest of York's gateways, standing at 63 feet, or 19.2 meters in height. On the top stand life-size stone figures known as the Wild Men of York. Legend says they will come alive and throw their boulders down onto anybody daring enough to attack the city. Monk Bar has the only working portcullis on any of York's gateways. A portcullis is a big gate that can be lowered when the city is under threat. The last time it was lowered was in 1953 to celebrate the coronation of Queen Elizabeth II. The gate came down brilliantly, but got stuck when it dug into the road below. It took days to raise it back up, so it's never been dropped down since. We still claim it works though. As we leave Monk Bar, look along the street to your right, and set back, you can see the wonderful county hospital, built in 1850, which is now used as apartments. Keep looking to the right, and you can see some older buildings on Monkgate, dating from the 17 and 1800s. Any earlier buildings on this street were destroyed in the Siege of York in 1644. If we were to follow the road ahead of us across the roundabout for about 10 miles, we would come to Castle Howard, the stately home dating back to about 1700. Castle Howard is where the period drama Brideshead Revisited was filmed. With its elegant house, beautiful gardens and lake, it is well worth a visit. We are moving into Foss Bank and running alongside York's second river, the Foss, on our left. It probably gets its name from the Latin word fossa, which means ditch or stream. There is no longer any commercial river traffic on the Foss, which was made into a canal in 1792. Today, both the Ouse and the Foss are mainly used by pleasure boats and wildlife. Looking to the right is Sainsbury's supermarket. In the 1980s, when this was being built, workmen unearthed hundreds of skeletons here. Work was stopped, and an investigation found this site to be the largest Jewish burial site outside of London, dating back to 1177. The chief rabbi was called in, the land was consecrated and declared sacred, and the bodies were left in peace. This area is known as Jewbury, which means Jewish borough or town. If you look to your right, you will see that the city walls come to an end.